sounds really easy and so forth. So why not just take a shot? And they're wondering like what's going on. And in actuality, for most folks, it's obviously the truth is somewhere actually really around the middle. There are going to be some areas of a given position where you are going to be particularly strong in, and some areas where you are not necessarily going to be strong in, and maybe even you will be overconfident about some of your assessments on, well, can I really do this part of the task? And we're going to talk a little bit about, well, then how do you kind of find that little, that careful balance? But at the end of the day, regardless, one common trend is, and this is a famous quote by Bob McKenzie, often attributed to many other people, but I looked up who was the original source of this, which is you miss 100% of the shots you don't take, right? And this should be a pretty obvious of where I'm going, which is at the end of the day, you gotta just go for it. You can't let either ends of those spectrums that I shown earlier, especially the imposter syndrome, to prevent you and keep you in this stasis of not applying, where you're just in the stasis of, I look at a job description, I read all the descriptions, and you think, well, maybe I don't quite know A, I don't quite know B of this job description. I'll work on another project. I'll start refining my project. I'll maybe take another course, or I'll even go and do some studies. All of that are really, really harmful, actually, and kind of holding you back from the application process, which is ultimately what's going to be one of the most important journeys, but also one of the important journeys for not only for you to kind of just get started with it, but also for you to familiarize yourself with, well, what is the interviewers and what is the industries, what are they actually looking for from a candidate at various positions? So to kind of start off, really, it's just about a numbers game. But also on top of that, you want to know your numbers as well. If you're not starting off the process, the issue is you won't know your numbers actually, because it is just basic statistics. And if you are really limiting the amount of application you're sending out, what ends up happening, of course, is just the sample size becomes small, which means you're introducing yourself to a lot of variance, right? So if we think about it all kind of like logically from this mindset, it actually makes a lot of sense. So here is kind of like a quick, I wouldn't say these numbers are going to always be applicable to everyone, but this is roughly the industry numbers. And I would say if I kind of apply certain weights of my own experience onto this, and what I mean by weights is there are certain areas where I noticed I was having a high amount of success with, and certain areas where I was having a lower amount of success with compared to kind of like what is the industry average, but it's roughly around this level, which is, so suppose in this situation, you have 400 applications that are being sent out, and those applications, we'll just call them all raw, cold apply. You're going to something like LinkedIn, Glassdoor, a company's website, and so forth, or the job portal on NYC Data Science job portal side, and you're just applying through there. And chances are, actually, if you're going through the job portal on NYC Data Science side, you might even see a little bit higher percentage return because of how that process works. But if you evaluate, okay, from those 400 applications, about give or take roughly about 12% or 15% of them make it over to the screening process. So we'll talk about the screening process and also some of these processes later on. But typically speaking, this is kind of like your typical journey from application to an offer. And actually the on screen is a typo. I just realized that really should say offer. The final step should just say offer. Sorry about that. I don't know what I was thinking when I typed on screen. Screening, initial kind of like first foray, could be with the recruiter, could be with actually just the hiring manager themselves, very rare, but often with the recruiter themselves, a recruiter first. Then to a tech assessment stage. The tech assessment stage could be a few different ways. It can either be a take home and so forth. And I'll talk about some of these in greater detail later on. A panel, basically you could think of panel as either multiple rounds of interviews that follow, or you could think of it as like maybe 1 or 2 rounds, including a final interview, or you could think of it as an all day and so forth. So I'm trying to kind of lump these together, okay? So if you kind of map out the journey and assume that did not typo on screen. In fact, can I even make an edit? I don't want to make an edit right now, but remember, just the on screen should say, it should say offer. So if you make it through the whole way through, from 400, you get roughly about 10 offers, okay? And that's essentially how this will is going to overall look like. But if you think about it from just, well, if we just simply shift just everything by a denomination of 10 back, we go 40 applications. Then at 40 applications, you roughly only receive one. You roughly receive one offer, and you have to think about variance at that point, right? Because from 40 to receive one is not that far away from 0. So it could just be that you dumped out 80 applications, you get no offers. It could just simply be standard statistics at that point. So you should not feel discouraged when you are just pumping out these resumes and you're sending out these applications and you're not getting anything towards the end. But what you should look like at is, as you are sending these things out, start tracking them. Track your numbers, track the number of applications you're sending out and so forth. And chances are you'll find that actually when I first did this, kind of looked at these numbers, I thought, this can't be right. It looks a little high still from my experience, maybe. But then I thought about it and I realized, and I looked through my history of notes, and I realized I actually did not send out that many applications. So very often you'll feel like you're dumping out these applications, but your chances are from your, I can't speak for all of you, but for the majority of you, I would wager that you're probably not sending out as many applications as you think. And really that's just the main goal I want to kind of emphasize in these 3 points, which is you just, at the end of the day, you got to maximize your chances. And also from both my own experience, but also experience of our past alumni, the more it's a bit, at the end of the day, a lot of it is about a numbers game, and you got to just keep sending out applications, okay? And that's, and not only sending out applications, but also keeping track of the numbers and this data, your data, in something similar to this process. So you could kind of roughly evaluate which areas and which stages may you having a slightly less return than you are expecting. Now you'll notice I actually said the kind of have this little asterisk here from application to screening, right? And the reason why for this asterisk is because referrals, personal referrals and references definitely help increase this percentage, okay? This is just roughly about like kind of from cold, from just raw applying and so forth. And I will say that from my experience, roughly, if you get a direct referral, if you know somebody who is willing to refer you, your chances of making it to the screening process increases significantly. But that doesn't necessarily mean all the other numbers will shift. And I'll talk a little bit about why that might be the case. Okay, so while referrals definitely help, do not kind of lean on it as a crutch. Don't just think, oh, I don't have as much people who are willing to give me references. That means I don't have as high of a chance. That's actually, you're going to see that as I talk about some of the other steps along the way, it actually might not pan out to be that for that to be the case. So first and foremost, let's just talk about now as you make it through the application to the screening process, and then what's going on here. And the most important thing is you want, in order for your application to kind of really get noticed, but also for you to have a higher chance of moving through along the line, is you need to make sure that you are, one thing that I've observed I was doing, and chances are many of you are as well, is you're compacting your entire life into just a timeline, which is I started from A, and next I went to school, and then I went to get a job, and then blah, 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 blah from there, right? And what does that do? All that basically literally doesn't tell anyone anything other than you become a generic fit for something, right? And the more generic you are, of course, then the harder it is for you to really stand out any step along the way. So as a result, one thing I want to stress is you are not a timeline. Don't make yourself kind of locked into that sort of thing. Really think about your journey as a whole, and then how do you demonstrate that? How do you demonstrate who you really are in basically storytelling about yourself? And that comes from the resume process to the interview process and so forth. And as a result, you want to think of it more like, if you look at the standard resume format, right? It basically is start off always with some sort of introduction about yourself, and then followed by professional experience, followed by education. That's usually the default format. Of course, some of it will change depending on where your strengths are and which areas you want to highlight, but that's roughly the shell. And really what it breaks down into is kind of who you are as a person holistically. That's what people are interested in initially first, as a snapshot, right? Kind of what is it about maybe you that kind of fits a certain type of profile that will stand out to them. So for example, instead of saying for example, from my side, I'll use my own scenario. Instead of saying I was a manager, it can be I am a mentor who enjoys lifting people up from certain areas and playing a part in guiding their journey to success, something along those lines, right? So you kind of see where I'm going with that idea. And then similarly, when you move on to your job experience, instead of it just being a dry dump of your work experience, highlight more about the contributions that you have made. And no matter how mundane that position may feel, I guarantee you, if you really kind of internalize and think about, well, what important piece did I play to that overall machine that I was part of? What was, if I was removed, what would happen if they did not replace me? That's kind of what you want to kind of consider about when it comes to highlighting important contributions you made, and also demonstrate value from your results. And this also will tie into what I taught when you evaluate your overall resume. And let's say you don't have a lot of data science experience on there. What can you use to highlight? Well, there's a reason why the program constantly stresses business value for projects, because you want to really demonstrate, well, what is a contribution your project would have made if it was part of that industry, and what value does it bring from its results? So if you've done an analysis, what finding did you have that you believe would be impactful if somebody were to work in that specific domain and look at your given project? And then finally, what are the credentials you have that kind of backs all of this up, right? And this takes a form of education, certification, hard and soft skills. What I mean by that is, for example, your ability to handle Python, SQL, and so on and so forth. Okay. And feel free, guys, if you guys have any questions, just ask. This is intended to be also an open discussion as well. So if you're not sure about something, feel free to just either type in the chat, or just you could just hop on mic. Okay. So now you take all of that. Now, how do you kind of marry it to the typical data science job description? And this is the typical data science job description. I'll say I even seen this data science job description, and people, bash data science job description and say like, oh, it's always looking like for the moon and so forth. But actually, I look at it and I don't think that's necessarily true. Like, people make fun of what data science job descriptions look like, but there's actually kind of like a story behind the scenes here. So for example, I've actually seen this exact job description in a few different positions. And what's hilarious is, as I was doing my research, I kind of looked and I realized that, wait, some of them are literally using just a template from different places and literally not making any modifications to it at all. So for example, I've seen this position, this job description for various different companies, but it actually turned out to literally just be the job, like the recommended job description template from Glassdoor. And the guy people who were posting it were just too lazy to say, okay, well, I don't really know which one of these to drill down to, so I'll just copy and paste it and then toss it here. But that being said, it doesn't mean that it's completely unfounded, because you have to think, well, if companies like Glassdoor and LinkedIn have these job descriptions for recruiters or HR to use, then chances are there is a fair amount of at least kind of high level stuff here that does play a part in skill sets you need to demonstrate at some point of the interview and application process. So towards the top, you'll observe right away problem solving skills. And what does that really come down to? It really basically means that you are able to demonstrate value from whatever work you're doing in data science. That's essentially it. And that is first and foremost the most important thing I found in every single interview. Okay, and I'll talk a little bit about that later on as well. And then also, second of all, yeah, SQL is misspelled. It is exactly this is a screenshot actually of the template. This is a screenshot of the template, just so you guys know. So I didn't type it. It's actually a screenshot of the Glassdoor data science template. You can look it up online as well. Yeah. But programming languages, the hard technical skills, those are the next. And then experience working with and creating data architectures, knowledge of machine learning, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. But really what it comes down to is the hard fundamental skills, the gamut of which you have been introduced to in the program, and then your ability to then take those skills and apply them to some sort of business context. So it should sound very much like the projects that you have done, okay? In addition, another thing for you to note is, and chances are you already know about this, especially because you are all in the field already, that a lot of companies use some form of ATS, basically programs that in some way try to extract relevant items from a resume to make it so that certain resumes make it through because they have passed this automated test, okay? The larger the company, the more likely you need to kind of play towards this to make it past the initial kind of filtration process. But if it's a smaller company, I found that from smaller companies such as startups and so forth, generally, from my suspicion, they don't lean on this as heavily. And the reason why I make this claim is because my rate of return in terms of from application to screening and later on and movements to later on down the road tended to be much higher for smaller companies and for larger companies. Okay, and I'll talk a little bit about why that may be the case. There are a variety of different reasons. But at the end of the day, what does the ATS look for? Titles that are understandable and keywords that are understandable. So in other words, things that if you have a title that's very maybe niche, you may want to consider, well, what is a generalized industry equivalent of this? Okay, so I'll give you an example of a title that's very niche. Technically speaking, there are a lot of data science positions in certain companies. They're not even data science, like purely by that name. It's something like maybe a specialist of data science or whatever, right? Maybe something like that along those lines. So technically, it's the data science role. If you actually interview for it and so forth, they will talk to you about as it is the data science role and so on and so forth. Your job responsibility will be that. But if you don't write data scientist on as that role, then it won't be plucked out. That keyword will just get lost, essentially. So when you have a title that is maybe a little bit niche, just keep in mind that you need to think of, well, what is the actual generalizable industry term for this title? And that can play a part. Similarly for other things such as other keywords and the like. But of course, the keywords that you really want to always try to make sure you hit is looking at the JD and seeing what sort of keywords do they appear to look for and make sure they're found somewhere in your resume. It doesn't have to be just in the key, like kind of skill set. It could be in a project description or a job or one of your work history descriptions of something you've worked on, right? So it could be something, for example, let's say the one of the job descriptions says something like experience working with CNNs. You could say like coursework included CNN, and that would actually or have already had handled that keyword at that point. So as a result, you don't need to lie for these keywords to get on your resume. As long as you think about incorporating them as some way, chances are you've encountered those keywords in your use case as for something. Another thing about resume, I blurred this out because I have my phone number on this, but is a big game changer for me was actually I was using a very generic kind of templated resume copy at first. And chances are, if you look at the one on the left, it's the you could picture what kind of standard template this is, right? Name on the top, you got this like blank space and all that stuff with the job, like kind of like a quick description about yourself, and then followed by professional experience, education, and so forth. And I was sending this out and I was getting okay returns, but nothing that I felt was really like hard hitting. None of the company that I was chatting with at that time really were that interesting for to me. So I thought, okay, well, my return seems to be a little bit lower than I expected. So what did I do? I actually did some research, and I found out from a variety of different sources from the hiring side, because I directly asked some folks from the hiring manager's side, who are among my friends, and they don't have to be in data science, because at the end of the day, you're just trying to get a sense of how people think from the other side of the equation. And they basically told me that the issue with the resume was that it just didn't look good. And it wasn't very attractive. So at first I thought, well, that's kind of silly. We're going to technical fields. Like, who cares about aesthetics? But I did take their advice. I went through a profession. I used one of those professional pay services. It costed like $10, and basically all it did was you had a latex template, effectively speaking, and it was able to use the latex template to basically add this graphical enhancement to your resume, right? So you can see kind of the effect on the right. And you don't want to make it too fancy. If you make it too fancy, it'll mess up the ATS. You need to make sure your resume is still easily parsable. And for those of you who work with like PDF parsers and so forth, the fancier the doc, the more annoying the parsing algorithm has, like the more work you have to do with the parsing algorithm. So there's a balance to this as well. But as you can see here, this is not a very difficult to parse doc still for any sort of automation. And the moment I changed this template, my response rates actually from application to screening shifted from code applications shifted to something like 3-folds. So it was a big game changer. I did not think it was going to be, but it certainly was a big game changer, okay, from my experience. So I would say if for those of you who are wondering, are those resume services and I didn't change any wording or anything at all. I literally just only changed the format, only the appearance. Are those resume services also worth it? From my experience, it actually was. It played a big part. Okay, so I was able to reach significantly amount more in terms of moving from application to screening, which also led to, of course, an increase in offers I was receiving as well. No, I actually just copy and pasted everything. Everything was copy and pasted. Actually, wait, I lied. No, one thing I do recall, the skills, I did remove a good amount of the skills to make it fit on the right. But as you can see, if anything, that was like less than on certain keyword side. I just simply made sure to focus on the core skills that I thought were things I was comfortable talking about in an interview, and I also knew that they were likely to pop up.
Hey, Drace.
Yeah.
Is that still a one-page resume?
It became a 2-page resume, I believe. Let me just quickly check on that just to see.
Because it looks like you have a lot of white space there.
It up. Yeah, let me just take a look. Yeah, it became a 2-page resume. It did go from a 1-page to a 2-page.
Okay.
Okay, so as you move from the, as you move from the application process and you gradually move towards the screening, you're going to get some calls back and you're going to get some email outreaches back. And by the way, it basically going to be, this scenario is not going to be like a steady kind of scenario. From what I observed, it was when it rains, it pours sort of situation. So rather than say every week I was getting maybe 2 or 3, all of a sudden I got like 6, and maybe I'll have another week where I have 0 callbacks and so forth. And that's usually because they operate on some sort of cycles anyway when they're doing this kind of stuff. So you're going to get, so gradually you're going to get these responses through coming back about scheduling that first screening. And often that first screening is going to be with the recruiter or the HR manager of the position or of the firm. And when they are calling you and having that conversation with you, one thing you have to remember is they're literally just looking to check off things on a checklist that was essentially handed to them and saying like, okay, does this candidate already meet this kind of checklist? So as a result, make sure that you are not really you're not dealing with this as if this is your final interview. So I know it sounds really obvious, but folks get often a little too excited during that, that first callback and that first response and so forth. And okay, I want to start moving. You got to just take it slow, basically be cool. Okay. Remember, the other party is very likely not to be technical. And often when they are asking about certain things on whether or not I have knowledge of X, Y, and Z, I will explain a little bit about it and saying like, yes, I do. By the way, just to check, do you want me to use some of the specific terminology or just keep it a little high level? Because I'm okay with either. And just kind of, A, you're showing them that you know how to speak to a non-technical audience in this way. But B, you're also not going to confuse them with things you say this way. Okay, so you have this is it's a very easy way to kind of gauge the barometer of, well, are they looking for certain specific keywords? Which is why if they are saying, okay, yeah, you could use some of the technical terms, they're just looking for those. Or are they just really looking to see, well, does this person sound like they have some experience and can do the job? Okay. So keep your answers simple and yet confident. So in other words, don't feel the need to overly elaborate everything. Often you're going to find the 30 minutes that you have in this call is going to go by very, very quick. And always prepare at least one question. Because if you don't prepare, and literally that question, if you are not sure what to ask, you can just ask about, so what are some of the challenges that may not have been described in the job description, or things like what caused an opening in this department? Because you want to ask at least one question, because it is a way of, it's a game at the end of the day of showing them that you have some interest, right? Because they're going to ask you things like, why are you applying for this job? And of course, we don't want to just say like, the answer is obvious. You have an opening, I need a job, so that's why I'm applying. But everyone knows that, but you still have to do the same, the song and dance that everyone's looking for. So ask at least one question. It could be like generic, like I said, something like the one I would an easy one to recommend is, so what caused this opening why is there an opening here? Did somebody depart, or is this a new opening? Or another question I often ask is this a role that it will be collaborating with other data scientists, or is this an individual contributor role? Okay, so that's a kind of like, those two are questions that are easy to ask, and you could kind of ask them to every single company. All right. So generally speaking, if you just kind of somewhat follow the tips in the screening process, you should be able to make it through the to the tech assessment. Okay, but I will talk about what sometimes causes the screening process to not go to the tech assessment. Now, believe it or not, earlier I mentioned that if you got a direct referral to meet with, say, a recruiter at the firm, I found that actually then the percentage of screening to take home is actually lower than if I went just directly through the company as a kind of cold application drop off. And the reason why is a lot of positions, not a lot, but there is going to be a good amount of positions on a site or on a job board that's posted there that actually doesn't exist, okay? And what I mean by that is it's already filled by some sort of internal candidate, or it's just there because they forgot to take it off, or it's there because they're just trying to feel out the waters and so forth. And then what happens is if you are, for example, referred by somebody within the firm for this type of position, you'll speak to the recruiter. But then I've even had more than one instance where the recruiter just said, oh, by the way, yeah, we're not actually hiring for this position, but if you're okay, I'd like to keep your contact. So that's actually occurred. Okay, so as a result, when you go from the screening and you don't get a take home, just remember it doesn't necessarily mean none of these steps when you don't make it through. It doesn't mean it's always going to be your fault. Okay. There's going to be a lot of factors at play and a lot of factors you just can't control, which is why I emphasize back that it's just it's a numbers game at the end of the day. Okay. So the tech assessment, what can it look like? This was a catch-all. Okay. The tech assessment can be many different ways, kind of take the form of many different appearances, but the most standard is some sort of take home. Okay. But it can also be a live coding challenge. It can be an on the spot when you're meeting with, they say, okay, the next step is you're meeting with a senior data scientist and they would like to interview you for an hour, and could be like on that spot. Okay. And this process can all be also like combined together, extended, and so forth as well. So just remember, these are more generalizable ideas. And sometimes you can get like an on-the-spot exam where you just totally didn't expect it. I still remember I received a job interview offer for a position I didn't apply for. Then the recruiter found me somehow, and then they moved me through. And at the day of the interview, they told me I would be interviewing for X, and the team member started testing me on Y, and I literally was like, I honestly have no idea, because I actually didn't. When they said, "Well, tell me, about this, and this," and I said, I don't actually even know that this was the job I was interviewing for, because this was the situation I dealt with, So it can get a little chaotic, and this was not a small company either. It was a fairly large media company, Vizio, where this happened. So don't think it just it's just like limited to startups or whatever. And regardless of whichever one you get, okay, whether it be a take-home, live coding challenge, or on the spot, take your time. Okay, when it's a take-home and it says like, oh, this assignment should take you 2 hours, that's not true at all. Okay, expect a hefty amount of commitment. For example, something that says 2 to 3 hours probably would take you about 6 to 8. Okay, it's just the norm, and I don't know why they do it. Probably to not deter people, or because everyone does it now. So if they put their actual amount, it will then really look weird, and so forth. But I recall even a simple take-home assignment that I had, something where I literally knew all the answers as soon as I read each individual question. It took me like 3 hours to write all the responses. And I was just writing the responses as soon as I saw each of the questions. So that could give you an idea of how much time you should expect to spend on these take-homes. And don't feel like, oh, I'm spending more time than it says. I must be doing something wrong. And this especially applies for the on-the-spot tech assessments where they're quizzing you and they're asking you questions. Always, if you try to make it a habit to, when you get an on-the-spot assessment question, rephrase the question back to them just to say, so just to make sure I'm understanding the question right, you are asking this, and then also take a Q&A process. Find out more information if you are not sure, because the easiest way to kill your tech assessment, if it's an on-the-spot tech assessment, is they are asking about B and you start answering A. Okay, and this has happened to me so often because on my side, I have a more generalized pool of knowledge of data science. So sometimes they're asking me about something and I'm thinking, oh, okay, well, it must be this. And then of course, as I'm brainstorming the solution out from it, I've gone a totally different rabbit hole already at that point. And it's very difficult to, at that point, climb yourself back out. Whereas if you were able to kind of calibrate which direction they were going with the question initially, you're not going to fall into that pitfall. And as a result, no matter how much you're looking at the timer where you're like, okay, this is a half-an-hour conversation, I really only have 5 minutes left, take your time to answer the question. Really think about, assess what direction is it going through. And this applies for all the other stuff too. And something to note, it's not always going to be fair. I can tell you that I know for a fact there has been on-the-spot tech assessments that I've done and also coding challenges that I've done where they told me I was wrong and I knew I was right and they were wrong. And in fact, I can even share, I had an experience with I have had experience with 2 companies, one which was small and one which large. There was a small company where they asked me about precision recall. And I told them, well, this is what precision is, this is what recall is. And they said, well, no, I think you mixed it. And I thought, at that time, I thought, of course, we're all under pressure of the interview. So I thought, okay, I guess I did. Maybe I did. But because at that time, I didn't really have enough time in back of my head to like recalibrate and think, well, wait, no, is that actually true? And then just to check, because after the interview, I thought that doesn't sound right. I'm very confident that I didn't say it wrong. Maybe I misspoke. And I looked, and sure enough, they were wrong. Yeah, so Ryan, you had a similar situation. And another incident I've had, I submitted a take home, and I didn't hear back. And I wrote to the recruiter and I said, oh, were there any feedback about the take home? And this was a take home where it was about concepts that I was very confident in, because when I first spoke to the recruiter and the recruiter asked me what was my feedback at the take home, I didn't tell him, oh, it was really easy, but I kind of hinted that, I got a little lucky. It happened to test all the questions I already knew. And the recruiter, so when I ask for feedback, this recruiter, it doesn't always happen. It usually does not happen. But I will say, to this recruiter's credit, he said, oh, we sent it to an engineer, and he said you made a few various technical mistakes and recommended not moving forward. And I told the recruiter, really? Okay, well, maybe I misread the question, and misunderstood it, but I was pretty confident, if you recall from our earlier conversation, that it wasn't a very challenging tech assessment. So I actually am a little surprised about that. And to this recruiter's credit, he got another data scientist on their team to take a look, and sure enough, they confirmed that, oh, the engineer was wrong. The assessment was, all the answers were correct. So I'm just telling you, it's not always going to be fair. And sometimes it's just going to, once again, it's random chance. This is why the amount of applications you submit make a big difference, because these things happen. Okay, people make mistakes, and you can end up with interviewing someone where they just don't know as much as you do, and there's nothing you can do about it. Okay, you can just do the best you can, and that's it, and you just hope for the best. So as a result, take your time and so forth. And by the way, if you find you're running out of time on the spot tech assessments where you are getting these question and answer processes, and you're finding that you're running a lot of time, consider how much you're maybe overly talking about details earlier in the interview that didn't matter. That's a mistake that I found I was committing. While I thought I was, they were very much interested in hearing my life story as a data scientist, they really weren't. It was just, oh, let me get a general idea to know that you could do the job. So now, about take-homes. They could come in a variety of different ways and so forth, but I will tell you, there are students who get help on their take-homes. I myself still recommend that for your own integrity, I understand that you could feel frustrated and so forth, but for your own integrity, but also to ensure that you realize take-homes are just meant to see, can you do the job? Are you going to be comfortable doing the job? Just do your best. If you do end up feeling like you have to ask for help or whatnot, try to ask for high-level help to see if you can solve this. To see if you can gain an idea of how to actually, what direction you need to move in. So I'm going to show you 2 actual sample take-homes that I've taken, and also walk you through a little bit about what is the correct way to solve them. And I assume these are the correct ways because I was moved on after them. Okay, so these are from different firms. The first was I'm going to keep this high level, of course, and vague. You're given a sample of over 100,000 rows of a machine's output and asked to approximate when there is an outage. Okay, so an outage could be defined. So basically, it looks like this: it's a timestamp. There are timestamps. They're regularly intervaled. I checked for that. And then there are these just numeric metrics, numbers. Okay. And an outage would be defined as any instance where the output deviates significantly from its normal value, and you have to kind of decide what the normal value is. This is that's just a description of the outage that they provided. So they wanted you to write a script and hand it to them that will output the start and end time of the outage to the best precise time value. So initially, as soon as you hear about this, of course, the very first thing you should think about is, okay, it's got to be some sort of time series problem, okay? And then if you consider, well, how do you actually solve this time series problem? You need to know a little, they were looking for a little bit of domain knowledge. And where was the domain knowledge in this? It had to do with essentially either intervention analysis, or it had to do with anomaly detection. Okay, and these are very common situations in data science. So being exposed to something like this, if you have done a project data, or if you've done a reading of things where you specifically kind of like looked into oddities, anomalies are always going to be interesting to be able to find and explain. So basically, it was just an anomaly detection question, and you could just. And all I did was I just used R's anomaly package for it. And of course, anomaly detection does require you to do certain things because, for example, you can detect a certain single or 2 points or 3 points of time as an outage. But those could just be random noise. Okay, it could just be bizarre, like a bizarre input would not. So as a result, you have to be careful because otherwise the anomaly output would be something like, well, an outage happened for about 2 seconds here, and then another 3 minutes here, and so on and so forth. And that was obviously not going to be what they were looking for, right? It should be very apparent from the outset of the question that, okay, what they're really looking for is, can you detect a block, and can you deal with all the noise that may be false positives in this situation? So as a result, what was one way you could combat this? You could do a moving average first. You do a moving average filter that filters out enough of the noise, and then get the anomaly blocks. You will get the proper anomaly block that way. Okay, so that was sample 1. Sample 2 was an open-ended question, and you could tell it's open-ended because they gave a ton of data. It was multiple different tables. It was each table had something around 200 or so records. And by the way, these were assessments for senior data science positions. So if they look a little tough, it's for a senior data science position. That it is what it is. Okay. So you're given multiple tables of of client records, something like, I recall the largest was something like over 2 million. And these tables have different, sorts of data in them. And they had different encodings, they had timestamps, descriptions, and so forth. And you basically had to come up with an idea of how to solve a problem with all of this data. Okay, and there was no right or wrong answer. Basically, that's what it came down to, and you had to recognize that there was no right or wrong answer. And instead, what you need to demonstrate is that you have the holistic thinking of how to solve a data science process from beginning to end. So what were things that I did? I made sure that I had scripts that helped, basically, that I wrote modules that help pre-process the data. I had scripts that automatically deployed the model that I proposed, and also evaluated the model that I proposed, did printouts, and so on and so forth. I had a scratch notebook that basically says, here is my thinking. I had a completed notebook that showed, here is my EDA, and here is how the scripts work. And then I had an overall README that described everything. Okay, so this was a take-home exam that actually took 1 week of my time to just do, on and off, not the full week, but on and off, basically, like maybe 2-3 hours a day, but overall something like 20 to 30 hours. And by the way, this was also another one where I received an offer from. So it was very much worth it to do all of this. And of course, you had to demonstrate a multitude of different knowledge here, such as how to join different tables together, how to group data, how to evaluate different types of data a certain way, so on and so forth. Okay, so these are two sample assessments. And once again, as I mentioned, these are for senior. These were for senior positions. So it is likely going to be a little bit more complex than, say, an entry level. All right, I was going to initially ask if anyone wanted to do a sample interview. I was worried that we would maybe have some extra time and there was enough to talk about, but I don't think we have enough time But basically, I'm just going to tell you what my sample interview question was going to be, which is almost always the question you're going to get from a data scientist who's interviewing you. Okay, so either a lead data scientist or a senior data scientist or whatever on the team. And you're almost always going to get this question, which is, tell me about a project you've worked on. Okay, a data science project you've worked on. And what you need to dissect is they're not looking, once again, for you to give them just this timeline of this project and all the steps and so on and so forth. That's not it at all. Okay, and I will tell you, so I'm going to let you also note that when I was interviewing with a lead data scientist or whatnot, I may have been asked about now the mathematical or code or CS question out of, say, a 60-minute interview or a 30-minute, sorry, not 60 minutes, 30-minute interview. 60 minutes usually tend to be more technical. But out of a 30-minute interview, maybe 1/20th of that time, they just threw me one random question, something like, oh, can you explain like just cross-validation? Can you explain regularization or whatever it is? Okay. Otherwise, every other question really just drills down to these things. When they say, tell me about a project you worked upon, this is really what you're trying to show them. And this is why they don't ask you questions like, tell me about regularization that often. It's because through that talking to them about the project, they want to see that you have demonstratable, applicable understanding of whatever you used. So instead of a project where you kind of just say like, okay, well, I did X, Y, and Z, that these are the tools, you need to say something more like, okay, I scraped site X using Python and a variety of different tools because I was interested in understanding the effects of this because this is a certain area of the industry that I observed has this type of value proposition and so forth. My goal was to do this with it. So after I scraped it all, I dumped it into a SQLite database because I want to have a local database to work out of, and also to be able to practice my my SQL commands. And then I, deployed a model on some sort of platform. Either you could say local, or I built an app that actually has the model, has the model pickle file or whatever it is. And the final outcome was this, which I evaluate will lead to this type of result, an increase in revenue in X, or it is a improvement over Y that's in the industry from my studies. Okay, so it's very obviously I'm giving you just a general idea, but as I mentioned, you want to kind of like have a rationale behind if you are going to say this is a step I took in this project, you need to think about what technical demonstration am I doing here, or what business demonstration am I doing here? And the technical demonstration is not just you've used it. The technical demonstration is you've used it to accomplish something. Okay, what was it? What was about it that you found you needed to accomplish something? So, for example, I chose to store my data on AWS because the data had this many, and in order for me to scale it, I chose to host it on AWS instead. Okay, so that is an example of what I meant. And also, just prep one project. If you're not sure of what to talk about, really prep one project to discuss, but make sure you really know how to discuss every point on it, even if it means going back and making updates and tuning your project, because you absolutely need to keep a clear narrative about this project, and you need to be prepared to be asked about anything about this project as if it was a job you've done. If you're talking about a project you've done, you need to treat it as if it was part of work that you've done. So they will ask you questions about how did you do any of the stuff that you did? How did you measure success? That's a question that you should almost always expect to be asked. How did you measure what counted as success to you? How did you constitute success about it? Or how did you evaluate it, et cetera? And how was the solution deployed? And if your answer to how the solution was deployed was, it's in my Jupyter notebook, that's not going to be good enough. Okay, I built an application in Shiny. I built an application in Flask. I had an AWS endpoint. Okay, those are actually answers you want to provide instead. Okay, or I had an overall report that was delivered to the client that met some sort of satisfaction. So as I said, this is just just one piece. I cannot talk about, of course, the entire process, but hopefully this gives you some ideas to start working with. But at the end of the day, just remember some quick recaps. It's a numbers game. Job descriptions are often misleading. You're not a timeline. Prep your narrative, prep your project, prep your narrative, prep a project you're going to talk about within your narrative, and take your time during any sort of take-home assessment. So yeah, hope that was helpful, and best of luck. If I have I am working with Vivian to try to see if I could also have some time to kind of like maybe work on part 2, where I could maybe talk a little bit about also the the interview, the panels process, and panel interview, and so forth as well. Okay.
Cool. May I suggest to give a round of applause to Drace?
Thank you, Drace.
My pleasure, folks.
I have several questions, if I may.
Ryan, we're gonna arrange another event. I just want to be respectful of people's time, but
okay.
Don't worry, we're gonna.
I do, Vivian. I could stay around for like 10 minutes. Not a big deal.
Okay. You sure?
Yeah.
Please.
Yeah. Folks have questions. Yeah.
No, Drace, actually, it's really simple. So in the week-long tech assessment that you had, you mentioned that you deployed it somehow. What exactly did you do to deploy it?
So one, I built a, you don't have to go the entire way through. The core of what only probably needed to be done was just to have the pickle file and a script that basically just lets a prompt print out so that people can insert a data through command line or through a kind of, inputter, like let's say raw input, right? In your script, it says raw input, put the data in or upload the CSV, for example, upload a CSV of samples, and then it automatically will print out the generated predictions. So it
was like a Python module that you
exactly.
Yeah.
So basically it just became an import this thing, run it, and then it will ask you, do you want to load a CSV or do you want to simply just enter certain values?
Okay.
And then what it did was, and it sounds complicated, but it's actually literally what just did like an if then or whatever, in the process, and then it would print out this is the generated predictions. But I also have, like I said, you don't need to do this, but I also built a Docker image for it as well, a Docker file that has the dependencies as well.
Okay, that's more complicated.
But that is that probably was overkill.
Do you mind if I ask a question as well?
Yeah, go for it.
So really quickly, just trying to understand the metrics. Did you apply to multiple job boards, and which ones did you find led to the most callbacks?
Yeah, I actually literally hammered LinkedIn probably like 80%, and then Glassdoor maybe 20%. I was because LinkedIn just made it really easy to just drop off an app and forget. Glassdoor sometimes not so much, but those are the ones I usually hit. And I think just because of the small sample size of Glassdoor, LinkedIn gave me a lot more results. But yeah.
Okay, thanks.
And Drace, it's Pfizer that you landed the job with? Did you say?
No, well, close. I'm with Merck instead.
Merck, okay.
Yeah.
Great. And then just real quick, maybe Vivian can mention this talk about this as well. So since there's such a huge demand, there's so many jobs available, it's just astounding to me that it's so hard to land a position. What's going on? Like, why are they people are just so selective about the candidates who they're looking for?
So I will say I actually did have more than one offer, right? So it wasn't just Merck. There was one from Corning. There was one that was in the works with Beasley, but then the insurance group. And then I basically told them like, hey, and then there was a few startups as well. So it's not as daunting as I said. If you look at this scenario, right? 10 out of 400. It looks bad, but it's not actually as bad as you think, because you have to keep in mind these 400 are literally just like 5-second clicks most of the time. You just drop off the app and then just fire and forget, so to speak. And actually, the panel is the equivalent of like a final round. And in a follow-up session, I actually will tell you that I think that for most people, chances of the panel to offer is probably going to be a little bit better than mine. I have a hunch that I failed a lot of personality fits on the final round, because from what I heard from many people, final round to offer usually tends to be should be a little bit better than this metric.
Okay. Wow. But congratulations, Drace. I wish you all the best.
Thanks.
Thanks for doing this.
Yeah, a quick question, Drace. Great to see you again. that
Hey, Nathan.
you found a new position. About tailoring your resume, were you actually trying to include like, I just, if you wouldn't mind clarifying, like you said applying to like niche positions, were you actually trying to include like language that resembled the job title in your resume when you applied?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. When I said niche position, I meant if your job title at one of your positions is a little niche and it's not like really, it's not a commonly used job title, change the wording so that it is a more standard job title. So maybe you have like a job title that really you're doing the work of a manager, but for whatever reason, your title is like some bizarre thing, right? Just change it to manager.
Okay.
Yeah, I actually did not adapt my resume to I didn't change my resume to any jobs I applied for.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Okay, guys, we're gonna wrap up, and hopefully we will get Drace back very soon. Thank you for joining us in today's event.
Yep.
I mentioned in the chat, if you're still looking for a position, please make sure you send your latest resume to hiring@nycdsa.com. Courtney is working with a few hiring partners to fill their positions, so have your latest resume will be helpful. Okay, we'll see you guys next week, same time, 10 a.m. And we're gonna present more content to support your job hunting process.